Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you here today for our workshop to prepare for federal funding. My name is Katie Southworth. I am the Advocacy Program Director at Southface Institute in Atlanta. Before we kick off with our all-star panelist lineup, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. The format of this hour-and-a-half-long workshop is a panel presentation for the first hour, and then we'll transition into a Q&A discussion in the last half hour of the workshop. So we'll kick it off with my colleague, Allie Brown at Georgia Conservation Voters. She's going to set the stage for us and tell us about all of the exciting opportunities that have been created in the recently passed infrastructure bill and talk a little bit about what might be included in the Build Back Better Act. Then we'll transition to Alicia Scott with Partnership for Southern Equity to talk about centering people and communities in this work. And she'll tell us about the Justice 40 initiative and accelerator work that they're doing at Partnership for Southern Equity. Then we'll move to Michael Dexter with Southeast Sustainability Directors Network, who would talk a bit more about infrastructure bill investments specifically for local communities in Georgia. Now, I understand there are some folks that are located outside of Georgia on this webinar. I believe that a lot of that information will also be helpful to you, although it will be targeted towards opportunities for Georgia. And then we'll go to Cyrus Bedwar with Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance to talk a bit more about federal climate and energy investment, specifically funding the opportunities that are coming down from the Department of Energy for energy efficiency. And he'll share some pro tips on how to apply for federal funds and to put together successful applications, as well as winning teams. And finally, we'll transition to Jeanette Gayer, who's the Executive Director of Environment Georgia, who will moderate our Q&A discussion. As we're going along, if you have questions, comments, anything that you would like to raise up along the way, please put that into the chat. My colleague Spencer Rose with Southface and Jeanette will collect those, and we'll lift those up during the Q&A discussion at the end. This session is being recorded. It will be shared on Southface's YouTube channel, and we'll be sharing a link to the presentation slides and materials, as well as a survey at the end of the session. We'd appreciate your feedback on how we did today. We're always trying to improve, and so we can use that to tailor future workshops. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Allie with Georgia Conservation Voters. Again, so glad to have everyone here today.
Thanks so much, Katie. Hello, everyone. Allie Brown. I'm the State Field Director with Georgia Conservation Voters. As Katie said, we have a stellar lineup today, so I will try to keep it brief. But my main focus is to do really a bird's eye view of what these federal climate funding opportunities are, sort of highlight what that means for Georgia, and then talk about next steps, like who's involved here in Georgia, what advocates are doing. And then my colleagues will go into more detail about these investments, how to put together winning proposals, and more details about who's involved in distributing the funds. Next slide. So first, just to level set with everyone about what we're looking at here. This is a picture of President Biden officially signing into law what we call the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. Most of us who've been working on this for a long time know this as the BIF. We called it the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. And that's because, really the only way to make this happen was to get support from both Republicans and Democrats. And it worked. We had 19 Republican senators who signed on to this. And we're looking at $1 trillion in investments across the country in infrastructure. Just want to highlight that this is the largest long-term infrastructure investments, in nearly a century in our country. And, there are important investments in climate. I'll go into the details in a minute, but I do want to highlight that we don't see this as a climate bill. However, it does include what I think is about 300 billion or so in items related to our issues that we care about, including climate resilience, grid infrastructure, batteries, EV charging, that are really, really important. So Katie, if you want to go to the next slide, we can look at what is actually in this bill for Georgia. So I'm going to go through these quickly because they're not specifically related, most of them, to climate infrastructure, but it's still important to look at. We've got $8.9 billion investments in federal highway funds in Georgia, another 225 million for bridges. And then they're also looking at expanding broadband access, 100+ million, which we know is really important across rural Georgia to have that kind of access. And the other thing is just to note, recently the American Society of Civil Engineers gave Georgia a C- grade on infrastructure report. So this really, really is something that we desperately need. Next slide. And then a few other investments, again, skip through this because it's not directly related, but we've got investments in ports and waterways, quite a bit of an investment for airports, and then an investment as well in highway between Texas and Georgia. Next slide. So now let's dig into some of these climate investments that we're really excited about. The first is $5 billion to support clean energy jobs, specifically through investments in electric buses and low and zero emission technology. On the right, this is a picture of Bluebird Corporation facility, which is in Fort Valley, Georgia. They make electric school buses with zero emissions, and it's starting to get a lot of attention. People are actually talking about the toxic fumes that children breathe, while waiting for and getting on the school buses. And so we're hoping that with more investments, we can see more of this in Georgia. Next slide. Great. So then the other thing that is phenomenal is the investment in drinking water and water infrastructure. We're looking at 913 million to strengthen these issues. One thing that I know a lot of us are excited about that I've been working with is the investment in reducing lead in drinking water. And this is the largest investment in clean drinking water and wastewater infrastructure in American history. On the right, you see an announcement from the EPA on investments for underserved communities for water projects that specifically came from this Infrastructure and Jobs Act. So you can see that these programs are already getting rolled out through state agencies. And then the last two are focused on transportation investments. We've got 135 million over 5 years to support the expansion of EV charging networks across Georgia. And then also quite a bit of investment in public transportation. I think this is the largest federal investment in public transit that we've ever seen, and the largest federal investment in passenger rail since we created Amtrak. So these are really large investments in the transportation sector. So a lot of us are asking what's next. This passed at the federal level, right? And now we want to know what the next steps are for the process. It's important that community organizations are prepared, that we know where the funding flows, that we can work with communities that have been historically the most impacted by these infrastructure issues. And, I want to level set that we're still figuring this out, right? And trying to process this in live time, but I think it's important to get out and get in front of it and to kind of talk you through what we are focused on. So if you go to the next slide, I do want to first highlight, and I won't go through all of these pieces, right? But we still have a lot of work to do at the federal level. I mentioned before that the current act, which we are excited about, it has a lot of important investments, but we don't see it as a climate bill. It's a small slice of the bigger picture. The bill deals with items that tackle way more pure infrastructure needs, but we also need to address what we call human infrastructure in order to meet the moment of this climate crisis. So that's why a lot of organizations that I'm working with, including folks on this call, are pushing for the passage of the Build Back Better Act. It's, I think, nearly $2 trillion. And the last I saw was 550 billion in climate investments in particular. For context, that's 10 times greater than any other previous federal pieces signed into law. And like I said, I'm not going to go into all the provisions that you see here. Happy to send out the slides. I couldn't even fit it all on the page, so had to cut it down. But we see this as putting us on a path to cutting pollution by half by 2030. It's really the best chance we have to tackle these issues. It creates jobs. I thought it would save the average family $500 a year on energy bills. And I think the biggest thing that this bill would bring that the other infrastructure bill does not is an intentional, large investment in low income and disadvantaged communities. You see that in some of the provisions here, investing directly in communities of color that are often left behind in this work. My colleague Alicia will go into this in more detail. but that's what we're really excited about, as well as some really big tax incentives and tax credits that would expand clean energy. I think this bill combined with the other one, I've seen projections of creating 1.5 million jobs a year across the US. So we are, in tandem trying to educate about what the opportunities are for this current bill, and then, really still trying to push at the federal level. In terms of the timeline, the House already passed this November 19th, but now it's in the Senate's court, which is moving slower. Many of you probably have been hearing Senator Joe Manchin's name a lot. He's still the main holdout, but we know that the Democratic leadership really wants to get this done before Christmas. And that's going to be a tight deadline, but we're tracking this and are keeping everybody updated on the state on what is going to happen next. So next slide. So as we're pushing for the passage of this larger act at the federal level, we're also here right now talking with you all about the Infrastructure Act and making sure we can educate folks on where the money flows and how to best apply for funds. I won't go into too much detail on this. The main shout out is to Chelsea with the Green New Deal Network. I think Chelsea's in this webinar right now. She developed this chart that really helped me better understand where all of this is flowing. Chelsea, feel free to share your resources in the chat. But just generally wanted to show how particularly we're focused on community-based groups and nonprofits could receive funding through this. This is for, this chart was created for Build Back Better, but we think it'll generally be the same process for the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that was already passed. So when Congress passes, hopefully both of these, they essentially designate a lot of money to federal agencies and then determine the areas, these agencies kind of determine the areas that this can flow. And the main way that community-based groups will receive it is likely through state agency administered grants. They can be competitive grants, formula grants, or loans. So there's a lot of pieces to figure out, but we want to work with state agencies around the application process and how to do so in the most equitable way, and also work with community organizations who could really reap the benefits of this funding. Next slide. So I just wanted to slow down for a minute to talk about what role our coalition is doing in Georgia. So we work with a ton of different organizations who want to see both of these bills go through. And I just want to share that this can't be done without the advocacy that's taken place already. This is a picture of a group of nonprofit organizations and local legislators with Congresswoman Lucy McBath before we passed the Infrastructure Act, talking about what the benefits could be. So advocates across Georgia have been all the way in. We know this is the biggest federal funding we've ever seen for climate, and it's going to take a really diverse group of organizations and a strong coalition to get this over the finish line. We're talking about, like I said, the most historic investment that's ever been on the line. So there's a lot of opportunity here. And when the money does get passed or these acts go through, we kind of see this as a starting point, right? We can't just relax and say, great, now the money's going through. It's just the start of making sure it's done equitably, right? So if you're a community member, elected official, nonprofit leader, there's a role for you in this fight. Next slide. So lastly, I just wanted to share the principles of our coalition, the nonprofits we've been working with on this. Like I said, it's not enough just for the groups to get these investments through. We created a set of principles and values on this work. So it's about community engagement. It's about transparency, accountability, making sure that we're focused on sustainable and equitable recovery, right? So some people just want clean energy, but we want to make sure that this money is spent well, which means that communities of color, low-income communities, those who have borne the brunt of these climate change issues are invested in first. So these are the values of how we approach this work. So when you hear my colleagues talking about this, this will help level set with you kind of how we're thinking about this together. So, we really see this as the beginning of many conversations around this. This is my email. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you want to chat more about this and sync up so we can figure out how to get this done together. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, but first, I think we have a poll question that will be dropped in the chat box here. which is how did you become aware of federal funding opportunities or assistance? So there should be a poll question now for you to be able to answer this. And we'll be doing poll questions throughout this presentation to help us understand how to better do engagement around this and get a sense of who is in the room. But now I'm so excited to pass it on to my colleague, Alicia Scott. Alicia is the Just Energy Manager for Partnership for Southern Equity, and she's going to be talking about Justice 40 initiative programs and what the opportunities are there. So take it away, Alicia.
I'm sorry, I was busy trying to move the poll out from in front of the slides so that I could move forward. Well, thank you very much, Allie. That was a great overview of everything that is happening in Congress. And I know that that is a lot of technical, thank you, Jillian. I know it's a lot of technical information and everyone's wondering what all this has to do with them, especially Black folks. We're still looking for our 40 acres and a mule. So we may not have gotten 40 acres and a mule, but we did get Justice 40, the Justice 40 initiative. Next slide, please. So what is the Justice 40 initiative? So on January 20th, literally on Inauguration Day, President Biden, the first executive order that he signed was for Justice 40. It was the Racial Equity and Reconciliation Act that has evolved into the Justice 40 initiative. What does that mean? Well, the 40 means 40% of all federal spending is to be directed to historically marginalized communities. What that looks like on paper, and for the rest of us lay folks, that's Black communities, that's Indigenous communities, and all of the communities that have been marginalized and disenfranchised from enjoying wealth and optimal life outcomes for a number of things: pollution, environmental policy disparagement, all those types of things that we've been disenfranchised, and we are now the target of 40% of those investments that are coming down through the infrastructure bill, as well as the Build Back Better Act. Are we still moving forward with the poll? I don't want to hit end poll, but I just want to see the slide. I'll just see if I can minimize it. There we go. Okay, so it's issued July 20, 2021. The interim implementation guidance on Justice 40 was issued in July, and it includes actions for all of the required agencies. So what are you going to look for down there in the community? You're going to look for grant opportunities and funding opportunities from federal agencies such as EPA, EPD, and the Department of Energy. There are a lot of funding opportunities out there. Most of them coming through our federal agencies will be specifically for NGOs, nonprofits, and community-based organizations. But we wanted to make sure that those grassroots groups who may not have the capacity to be formally organized as a 501c3 or 4, we wanted to make sure that those opportunities didn't pass our community groups behind. So next slide, please. I won't read all those bullets. So the Partnership for Southern Equity, along with a few of our other partners, Groundswell, the Solutions Project, and Hummingbird, got together as soon as we learned about the Justice 40 initiative, and we created the Justice 40 Accelerator. So the Justice 40 Accelerator is exciting news. Why is that exciting? You do not have to be a formally organized 501c3 to apply for funding with the Justice 40 Accelerator. We are actively fundraising as well as seeking some of those funds from those federal agencies. One of the things we know in the community, especially in the Black community, is that we miss out on opportunities because of lack of organization. Well, we have taken this the need for organizing to the next level, and we have a vehicle to pull down the federal funds and put them on the ground in the communities that need them the most. We know that there's been a lot of talk of, yeah, there's $1.5 trillion, but how's that going to help me? How's that going to get to my community? Well, Justice 40 Accelerator is organized to do exactly that. We're currently in our current cohort. but I definitely implore you to pay attention to this. Go to the website, sign up for the newsletters, and be ready to apply for the next funding round. So Justice 40 Accelerator is the way in which we're going to get money into the communities, and it is nationwide. It isn't just for Georgia, but Georgia, we are anchored here in Georgia, in Atlanta, but it is nationwide. So if you're on this call with us today and you're in another state, please apply. Please go to the website and make sure you get on our mailing list to know for when the next round of funding comes through. Next slide, please. That is my email address. I wanted to keep it nice and short and sweet. Please reach out to me if you have any further questions on how we're getting this money out to the communities. The Partnership for Southern Equity, we believe that these relationships move at the speed of trust. And we also believe that those closest to the problem are those who have the solutions. So please reach out to me at your leisure if you have any more questions on Justice 40 and Justice 40 Accelerated. We want to make sure that this absolutely benefits the community. And then I'm going to introduce my colleague, Michael Dexter, who will be coming up next to go on further about some of these federal funding opportunities. But before Michael comes on, we have a couple of poll questions, I believe. Those will come up on your screen. Please share with us. And then we're going to hear from Michael Dexter with the Southeast Sustainability.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Michael Dexter, I work with the Southeast Sustainable Recovery Center, which is a pilot program of SSDN, or the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network. If we can go to the next slide. To give you, while you're filling out this poll, to give you a little bit more information about what SSDN is, we're a member-led organization that, apologies, one slide back. And we actually represent over 99, I think now, local and tribal governments across the Southeast. We're looking to help develop peer-to-peer networking, best practices, and other information that is relevant to this geographic region. We recognize that as we're looking at accessing federal funding for equitable sustainability, we can't always learn from the best practices that were developed in the Northeast or the Pacific Northwest, but we really need information that is tailored to and representative of the unique geographic region that we represent. And so I just wanted to provide a little bit of information about our member network. And in specific, my role is to manage our Southeast Sustainable Recovery Center, which looks to connect our local governments and their communities to federal opportunities for funding. Next slide, please. Thank you again, Alicia, for the background of J40. And in particular, just as it's necessary for nonprofit and NGOs and frontline organizations to prepare for effectively utilizing J40, so too is it necessary to prepare local governments because otherwise we will continue to see inequitable distribution of these funds to larger governments, again, not in our region and not really getting the money where it's most needed. And so I really want to help identify and dig down into the IIJA about some of the grant opportunities and how J40 and preparing for Justice 40 will actually help implement local and equitable sustainability. If I can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So first and foremost, as Alicia mentioned, we're still trying to figure out what OMB is and what the executive offices are in trying to implement J40. The agencies have developed and submitted information to OMB on the covered programs and the potential program modifications that they are considering. Unfortunately, those are not yet public. We have seen interim implementation guidelines, but we're still awaiting the final OMB guidance. Apologies. Thank you very much for clarifying the acronym. So what we're trying to figure out and how to deliver on J40 is really identifying how we can identify what communities are the focus of J40 or the disadvantaged communities. The best available information that we have at this point is actually looking at a few of the covered and interim implementation grants around Justice 40. In particular, FEMA actually, for the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, identified the key data sets that they're using to assess whether a program is actually focusing on or incorporating a disadvantaged community as part of that project or that focus of that project. And so a few of the different categories that we're looking at are high energy cost burden, water and sanitation services, as well as others that might be more familiar with many of our local governments and communities out there, such as areas of persistent poverty. But also I want to point out a few different tools. EPA's IJA screen is a great opportunity to help find one of the data sets that can incorporate many of these different information and help you better assess whether your community or the area of your community might have an environmental justice disadvantaged program opportunity there. We are looking to see from the Council of Environmental Quality an actual climate and EJ screening tool that is currently in development, and we look to hopefully see that sometime in the next few months. That will really help to better identify the disadvantaged community criteria for local governments and grants. The reason why this is so important, if we can go to the next slide, is that these grants are actually already happening and are coming out of the IIJA with acknowledgement that they will be going towards implementing the Justice 40 initiative. So as the federal agencies right now are getting the opportunity to put out these solicitations, they are having to figure out in their scoring for the eventual applications how they are actually going to incorporate and look to benefit disadvantaged communities. I really want to go a little bit further into detail on some of the opportunities for local governments. Fair warning, again, I apologize. I know this is a lot of information to get through, but I really just want to highlight a few opportunities in hopes that they might inspire you and further connect them to the J40 initiative and helping underserved communities across Georgia and across the Southeast. First and foremost, one of the key opportunities I found within the IIJA or the bipartisan infrastructure law is actually around water. This is something that we really haven't heard of so far. Many of the top line figures that we oftentimes hear are around energy or climate or some other area. But in fact, the IIJA or the bipartisan infrastructure law actually has significant funding for water. In particular, some of the key areas that look to implement the Justice 40 initiative around helping low to moderate income individuals connect to central sewer services. One of the big holdups on expanding central sewer services out to some of these areas are that the local government might be able to pay for putting a main line out there, but then it's largely upon the responsibility of the homeowner to connect their lateral to that main line. That can oftentimes be cost prohibitive. And so there's actually opportunities within the IIJA for supporting nonprofit or local governments in actually sponsoring and helping bring people onto the central sewer service. In addition, there's also opportunities to help rehabilitate or upgrade septic or decentralized wastewater provision. So looking at manufactured home communities or small package plants, as they're often called, around decentralized wastewater systems. So there's big opportunities here. In addition, looking to remediate the impacts from combined sewer overflows, stormwater issues. There's just so much opportunities that I'll be happy to share this presentation later for you to click more through it and identify something that might be eligible for your community. Again, I will caveat this by saying that this is directly from the legislation, a lot of this terminology. And so it really does come to how the agency will implement this. And so the point in me bringing these up currently is to really just inspire you early on and help you identify what grant opportunities you might want to track going forward. If we can go to the next slide. In addition to water, there's also significant opportunities in electric vehicles. As we heard from Ali earlier, just through the National Electric Vehicle Formula Program, Georgia is likely to receive $135 million over the next 5 years. That's great, and we hope that Georgia will do amazing things with it. But we also recognize that oftentimes with these state-led programs, they might not always percolate down to the local level in an equitable fashion. And so that's why there's also big opportunities with other sections of the electric vehicle programs and actually helping communities. First and foremost, the Section 11401 grants. These are grants for charging and fueling infrastructure. These will actually be focused half on existing alternative fuel corridors, but also half are actually open to locations regardless of being located on an alternative fuel corridor. So that's a huge opportunity that we just really haven't seen before, that I highly suggest, if your community is interested in this, to look more into the program. I will mention that the Federal Highway Administration, in trying to identify how to implement this program, has an open request for information for public comment until mid-January. Now, one of the key areas that they're looking for public comment in is how to assess equity in EV charging. That's not always something we normally associate with EV charging, but in terms, there are huge equity considerations, not only in equity and access, but also equity and impact. With EV charging, one of the big opportunities you're looking at is, unfortunately, we recognize with the transportation system, many highways and roads bisect historic communities and underserved communities. And that increase in transportation oftentimes has negative impacts in terms of air quality or other considerations. And so getting more electric vehicles on the road and reducing emissions or increasing access in underserved communities is a huge opportunity. And we encourage all nonprofits or NGOs or individuals on this call to submit their public comments on how to equitably implement these programs. Additionally, we're looking at a huge increase in the Clean School Bus program. This is something that was an existing program through the Diesel Emission Reduction Act, but is just going to be exponentially larger with the funding that is coming down through the bipartisan infrastructure law. Next slide, please. Now, in addition to both water and EVs, there's also large opportunities in climate resilience. And this is something that we have seen a lot of opportunities already, but we're looking at that being increased exponentially now with a lot of what's coming out through the bipartisan infrastructure law. First and foremost, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant has seen a large increase in funding through the IIJA. One of the big areas there is the BRIC program, as it's commonly referred to, is already implementing the Justice 40 criteria. In fact, they've incorporated it within their grant scoring. And so whatever applications are being put in now for the program that will actually be due in January is already actually incorporating and looking for how you've incorporated Justice 40 and engagement with underserved communities in your application. Additionally, there's a new PROTECT program, or Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative, Efficient, and Cost-Saving Transportation. That's another big opportunity focused predominantly around transportation assets, but also will likely broaden towards most municipal buildings if they're integral to the success of the transportation network. Additionally, for Georgia, the National Coastal Resilience Fund, this is something we already see an open proposal now that predates the IIJA, but that will see even more funding from that law. Next slide, please. Last, I would say one of the more interesting grants that I see came out of the IIJA is a Section 11406 Healthy Streets program. This is open to local governments, nonprofits, and it's really focused on targeting environmental justice impacts in underserved communities and investing in those communities, looking to not only assess urban heat islands, how do you remediate those urban heat islands, looking to do tree canopy inventories, and then how you ensure urban green equity going forward. And so that's a real key opportunity for a lot of nonprofits out there, as well as local governments. One of the more unique aspects of this is not only the focus area, but also that actually will allow for the hiring of additional staff if their duties are specifically around implementing this program. So that's why we're looking at building off the successes of the chief heat officers that you see in South Florida or in Arizona, or looking at conducting environmental equity assessments. You can actually increase hiring to target and help engage with those communities. In addition, I want to say we're talking a lot about these potential opportunities coming down the road. There are current opportunities open now that are of real extreme importance for local governments and their communities they serve. One that I really want to point out, EPA's ambient air quality monitoring. It opened yesterday. It is a huge opportunity that is open to local governments or nonprofits focused around increasing opportunities for air quality monitoring. If your community is anything like some of the communities I'm familiar with, sometimes one air quality monitor can be miles away from an area that is experiencing environmental justice impacts with localized air quality issues. And unfortunately, if they're looking for any sort of remediation, they have to point to that one air quality monitor that doesn't show that there's a problem. So this EPA ambient air quality monitoring actually is going to fund community efforts to target air quality monitoring in areas to demonstrate that there are concerns, and then using that as justification for helping remediate those concerns. So that's just a big opportunity, I think, that is open right now that community organizations across the Southeast should be focusing on as a key opportunity. If we can just go next slide, please. Thank you. I do want to close with just saying what to do next. Please stay updated on the IIJA grants. SSDN has created an IIJA tracker for a lot of the key opportunities that we've seen through that. And that is updated as at least on a weekly basis, if not daily, based on what's happening at the federal level. Definitely suggest you cross-reference your wish list with anticipated grants. Many of you all might have created ARPA, the state and local fiscal recovery fund project ideas. That's a key opportunity for looking to see what else and what might fit with some of these new grant opportunities. Again, building off of what has been said previously, collaborate not only internally and local governments, but externally with your communities. J40 is an all government approach to try to ensure that the communities that are oftentimes underserved are the ones that don't always have access to these funds and aren't always engaged in the development or distribution of these funds. So you really want to ensure that your local government is working with the community and collaborating on developing proposals, developing project ideas, and ensuring those are implemented equitably. And that's where, again, I have to point out Alicia and the rest of the J40 Accelerator is doing an amazing job at helping support a lot of these, not only in the Southeast, but across the nation, small frontline organizations and other community organizations, ensuring that they are prepared to maximize their opportunities with Justice 40. Thank you again. And I do want to then go to Cyrus, who's the Director of Policy for SIA, to talk about state climate and federal initiatives.
Thanks so much, Michael. Katie, do we have polls questions at this point, or are we moving straight in?
We have a final poll after your presentation. I'll also mention that we're going to put a link to the presentations, which has the hot links in it, to the tracker, which is the amazing tracker that Michael has put together. So I'll request there. Take it away, Cyrus.
Thank you so much. I first want to start by thanking Southbase for putting this together. I'm looking at the participants and their locations, and I think it's safe to say Georgia is out in front on getting some information out here, and that's due to the hard work of a lot of the people you see on your screen. Allie has been doing a lot of convening work within Georgia. Jeanette, I think this was your brainchild doing the roadshow, so thank you for your leadership. And Alicia and PSE, just thanks for anchoring that so important element of Justice 40. I'm going to pick up on where Michael left off with a pivot to what I know best, which is energy efficiency. Next slide, please. So SIA, for those who may not be familiar, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan regional organization. We serve 11 states in the Southeast, anywhere you can get sweet tea and grits in plentiful supply. And we work on a variety of issues. I work primarily in the utility sector on energy efficiency. We also have teams that work on the built environment, energy efficient transportation, and we're doing an increasing amount of place-based work as well. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk about today is in two parts. I'll kind of follow Michael's lead in describing some of the energy efficiency provisions in the infrastructure bill. And then based on both SEIA's experience administering over $25 million of American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funding 10 years ago, as well as my time at the Georgia State Energy Office within the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority, we put together at least a starting point for how organizations on this call and beyond might begin preparing for this investment if you've not already kind of played in this space. So for experienced organizations, this may not be as relevant, but for those who are just starting out and want to play a role in the distribution and application of this funding in their communities, that's what this section is targeted at. So we'll go through, we've already heard a lot about how funding is flowing and where it's coming from. A lot of the funding relevant to energy efficiency is coming through the U.S. Department of Energy, so that's where I'll focus. And then we'll kind of go through a few of the steps that we think might be helpful, many of which have been touched on before. Next slide. Go ahead, next slide. So the bipartisan infrastructure bill is broken into several sections, and I'm just going to go section by section and highlight some of the relevant provisions. So the state energy program listed, the bold isn't showing up as well as I hoped, but the bolded ones are the ones that I thought were of most interest. The state energy program is one of the flagship energy efficiency and renewable energy programs from the U.S. Department of Energy. Currently, every state in the country receives a formula grant every year for a variety of energy efficiency and renewable energy activities. I like to call this funding for people, not things, generally speaking. It's for program development and deployment rather than buying widgets for the most part. There are certainly exceptions. So this program in the infrastructure bill is getting somewhere between a doubling and 4 times of business as usual funding levels. So the money will flow from the Department of Energy to each state energy office. The program has been authorized for 5 years, so 5 years at this level of funding, unless and until the Build Back Better comes along and changes that. But this is a very general purpose funding instrument. It's good for those who are looking to start programs or expand programs that advance energy efficiency and renewable energy. Next slide, please. So Title V has the majority of the relevant programs regarding energy efficiency. And there's a lot in here. I'll just step through them. I will caveat, I think it's been said before, we're still gathering information. Some of these programs are brand new. And if you are one of those organizations who joins the U.S. Department of Energy's webinars, you are familiar with them saying we are trying to hire 1,000 people to do the work that we have to do. So they're understaffed, they're under-resourced. It's going to take some time for these new program guidelines and rules to be written, and then the money to start flowing through the system. We would expect that those programs like the state energy program that are already existing and well-established, well understood, those will be the ones that get flowing first. The first bullet point here is an energy efficiency revolving loan capitalization program. Congress has allotted $250 million that'll flow in a couple different ways. This will again be through state energy offices, through the state energy program, and it's establishing revolving loan funds or adding to revolving loan funds to support energy efficiency activities in buildings, including support for energy audits. About $100 million of the funding is distributed through the same formula that the state energy program uses. And then I think the balance of the funding, or a majority of the balance of the funding, is going to the top 15 states based on a per capita energy intensity scale. When I looked at who those states were in the SEIA territory, only Louisiana and Kentucky fell within that top 15. So Georgia is not included in that top 15, but Georgia will get some of this money. The next several bullet points are focused primarily on workforce development. At this point, for most of them, there's not much more that I can say about them besides what's in the title. So you can see there's $8 million on a competitive basis, again, through state energy offices for energy auditor training. We're going to need a lot more people in buildings understanding what needs to be done from an energy efficiency perspective. And so this funding will help train those auditors. Building energy codes. Building energy codes are seen as serving a variety of purposes, including energy efficiency, electrification, resilience, and more. And so there's a considerable amount of funding being given to training, educating, and helping with the implementation of building energy codes over the next 5 years. The next couple are focused on helping developing people's skills to work with some of the emerging and advanced building technologies that are now readily available. I personally am trying to replace a 20-year-old water heater. And because I do the work I do, I asked all the plumbers, I interviewed 5 plumbers, and I asked them all to give me a quote for the standard 50-gallon natural gas water heater, the most efficient natural gas water heater I could get, a natural gas tankless, and a heat pump water heater. And the responses I got were amusing to say the least. Several plumbers simply ignored me on some of the more advanced options, which kind of verified what we've been hearing, is that the trades aren't really familiar or comfortable with some of these technologies. So these funding instruments are really important. I will note these are the first 2 that aren't funded for 5 years at this point. So if these are of interest to you or your organization or your community, you'll have to pay attention sooner than later. These are funded in 2022, so we'll see those come out sooner. The next 3, future of industry, sustainable manufacturing, and smart manufacturing. The industrial sector has considerable energy savings potential. And so these 3 are targeted towards that. As we see more and more manufacturing facilities coming to the south, particularly around the electric transportation industry, these are going to be critical to helping those be as efficient as possible. The last 2 are very interesting. These are probably the truest to the name of the bill, infrastructure. These 2 funding pots are for actual things: energy efficiency, renewable energy, electric transportation measures. The first one is $500 million for schools. And the second one, and it's great that Southface is hosting this, is energy efficiency for facilities owned and operated by nonprofit organizations, very similar to Southface's Good Use program. So here in Georgia, we'll be well positioned, I think, to take advantage of that funding as and when it starts to flow. The schools, at this point, we are hearing that schools and school districts are going to be the eligible entities. And it's our expectation and confirmed by a lot of people that I've spoken with, that school districts are going to need help with this. So this is a great opportunity for just about any community to get involved in taking advantage of some of this funding. Next slide, please. Last set of funding slides. Weatherization, I think that program is very well known. It's getting a very significant investment of $3.5 billion. It starts in 2022. It has no end date. It is one of the key indications of lessons learned from RO, when we crammed a lot of money through a system that wasn't set up to spend it. So Congress has heard that, and they're giving weatherization agencies and the infrastructure that supports them time to spend this money well. There are a few additions. There's an innovation program. There's the limited allowance to do solar as you do weatherization projects, and some other interesting things with this iteration of the weatherization program. The Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant is also getting a $550 million investment over 5 years. That is, I think, functionally speaking, the state energy program delivered at the local level. Michael's members are going to be the target of that. Larger communities will get a direct allocation from the U.S. Department of Energy. Smaller municipalities will be able to apply to their state energy office for their share of funding. I put a couple links, as Katie mentioned. We'll be sharing all these slides and the live links that go with them. Here are a couple of great national summaries of the infrastructure bill that you can refer to that provide a more in-depth review of the energy-related provisions. Next slide, please. And go ahead one more. So, I think several folks have asked the question, okay, so what does that mean? What do I do? And this is the section of my presentation in which I'll try to address that. So the first thing is what we've been doing for the past several minutes, which is to illustrate the variety of funding mechanisms that are available or will be available. So I'm going to skip through this one pretty quickly. Go ahead. There are a variety of things I'm not going to cover, and I'm not going to go into all of them. This is more relevant when you're thinking about the universe of options that are being divided between the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better. But there are things being considered like tax credits, there was at one point the Clean Electricity Payments Program, and other things. So I was trying to be clear. And I should say, this is referring to a written guide that I've developed that Katie will share after the webinar as well. So you can read in more depth what's not covered in the guide. Next slide, please. So prepare. That is the lesson that is the drum I am beating. We went through ARA. Nobody expected ARA. Nobody expected it to unfold the way it did. And we did a lot of good work, but we also learned a lot of lessons. And when the administration started talking about the types of and amount of climate energy investment it was planning to make, SIA immediately began drawing on those lessons learned, dusting off our memories about what had gone well and what could be improved. And we started to put together thoughts about how to prepare the region. Next slide, please. So your first step is determine your interests. I know there's a lot of attention being paid to what are the funding mechanisms out there, and there's a lot of comfort that can be gained by kind of intimately understanding those details. But if you don't understand what your community is interested in and going to benefit most from, you're still going to have to figure that out when the fellow comes along. So I make this I have a very kind of concrete way of thinking about this. Write it down. Next slide, please. Develop a 1 to 2 pager on your energy efficiency activity, project, or idea, which will position you to respond quickly as ideas or as opportunities arise. Some questions you can consider. What is the need? Who and or what will the funding be used for? How will it save energy? How much energy will it save? Who will it serve? How will you measure success? Who, if appropriate, will your partners be? How, if needed, will you provide needed cost share? These are just some of the questions, and they're to get you thinking about the types of questions that are asked in these funding opportunities. Next slide, please. Get administratively prepared. These applications can be a bear, and to its credit, and in alignment with the Justice 40 initiative, the U.S. Department of Energy and I think all other federal agencies are taking a hard look at what they're asking people to do to access these resources. And we've seen them already take some very significant strides in simplifying, eliminating cost share requirements, extending application timeframes, reducing the number and types of forms that you have to fill, that sort of thing. But it's still a lot to do. So my suggestion in the guide is just to look at existing funding opportunity announcements. Michael referenced many of them. from a variety of agencies. So find the agency that you're most likely to apply to and pull off a recent funding application. Look through it, understand what you can do in advance, understand what you're going to need to do when the starting gun fires, and think about how you're going to get ready for that. There's some good templates out there. Next slide, please. Build relationships. Yeah, sorry for the shameless self-promotion, but I was looking for a good relationships image and I couldn't find one. So there's my PowerPoint prowess for you. Partnerships are critical. And even with extended application timeframes, it's unlikely that you will have time to fully form a partnership that is needed for an application once the opportunity goes live. So start talking to people and organizations whom you might work with, and start figuring out who's going to do what. What are your various, well, I have 4 C's that I mentioned. Competencies. Many of these programs require a variety of skills, and the right partnerships can bring those organizations together to deliver an effective project. Cost share, as I mentioned, think about who's going to provide how much cost share and in what form, if that's going to be needed. Capacity, we've talked about how under-resourced so many organizations are. So even organizations with similar skill sets can perhaps serve a larger audience or broader geographic area if they partner together. And then criteria. We expect increasingly with Justice 40 as a focus for applications to either require or give extra credit for certain types of partnerships. So you might want to be thinking about those. Next slide, please. Yeah, and I think that's it for me. I think we've got a couple of poll questions to round us out. And with that, I will turn it over back to Katie.
Thank you so much, Cyrus, and everyone. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in an hour. Again, the slides I included a link to slides and materials, the shared folder, so you can go back and read over and use some of the hot links to look at the various tabs. We have one more poll to post, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeanette, who will, for a moderated Q&A.
Thanks, Katie. I had 3 disclaimers, maybe before we dive into Q&A. The first is you've probably realized through these presentations that a lot of this is still in the works. There are a lot of questions that we don't actually know, and there are actually going to be some hearings that we will be pushing out to this group and others about what some of these programs actually look like moving forward. So that's my first caveat. The second is kudos to Southface and our presenters for pulling this together today. Our desire is definitely to continue to get this information out, and we acknowledge that, you know, there are some different people that we would want to just talk about, for example, electric cars or solar or whatever. So we're eager to take this presentation and continue to work on it and work with people on this call. So we hope that you'll reach out to us if you have an idea for folks that you think would benefit from a version of this presentation, and we can help make that happen. And the final thing I had a third thing, but I forgot what it was. I'll remember it soon. But then I think the first question, feel free to put questions in the chat. I think the first question that I've seen is from Kevin Kelly for Cyrus. Will there be a focus on job creation? Do you see some sort of jobs created type reporting requirement?
My guess would be yes, but I think we're still waiting for federal agency guidance on that. Given that its name is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, I imagine the administration is going to be looking for that to gain support for kind of maintaining or increasing funding in future years. Kevin, it's a great question, and we'll learn more as these programs roll out. And I meant to say, and I think this probably I will maybe perhaps take the prerogative to speak on behalf of my colleagues. If there are folks on the call who have better information than we do, please chime in the chat. And I know there have been a lot of people answering questions, which is fantastic. It's great to see such a strong network here, but we have many experts in Georgia.
Agreed. And I think that was my third thing, is that we are, we've that is trying to figure this out. We are open to more folks who are interested in joining us. And then part of, I think, what we want to do is make sure that these funds get spent really well in Georgia. So, if you've got ideas on how we can help make that happen, we would love to hear from you as well. Other questions? People
I'd like to chime in on piggyback on what Cyrus said about jobs creation and giving estimates and applications about number of jobs created. There's on the one hand, including an FTE, full-time equivalent, how many people will be doing direct work on a grant is pretty clear. But for the larger programs like the state energy program, which Cyrus highlighted, in the past, and especially under the Recovery Act, there wasn't sort of a uniform tool or way of estimating the secondary, the job creation down the line. I'm also thinking, the revolving loan program for manufacturers that's going to be coming out. I've heard mention there's an acknowledgement of the need for some tools for folks to use across these programs. That could be one of them, as well as with the weatherization program. And there's these Davis-Bacon requirements, wage and labor reporting requirements that apply across to federal programs. For the weatherization program, I've also heard mention of a discussion of a tool, accounting tool that can be used across that program, which I believe would be helpful, of course, depending on what that looks like, but for managing hours and reporting of wages under weatherization.
All right, I'm not seeing a lot of questions, maybe because we've overwhelmed everyone.
Yeah, I'll chime in just kind of on that point. I think one of the key differences, there are many key differences between 10 years ago with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. Sorry, Bailey, for speaking an acronym. And now, and one of them is data. We have so much more data and so much greater ability to manipulate that data now. There will be, if there aren't already created tools to help with a lot of this. SIA is doing some of this internally. Many organizations. Michael highlighted a bunch of federal agency tools that are being developed in models. There will be. So if that feels like a barrier, just reach out to somebody, and I'm sure that problem can or will be solved. That should not present a barrier to anybody kind of putting together a good application. Just because you don't know the answer doesn't mean it can't be delivered to you. There's a lot of infrastructure supporting people who want to spend this money well. I think back 10 years ago, people were left much more to their own devices because we weren't as talented or rich in resource. So
Cyrus, maybe you know the answer to this. Asbestos removal, could that be considered in any of the funds? Or Michael came off mute. Go, Michael.
No, Cyrus, I'll defer to you if you want to. So actually, thank you, Chuck, for that question. Existing EPA programs like the Brownfields program actually in very select circumstances can actually be used for indoor air quality, including, I believe, lead, mold, and asbestos. So it would really depend upon the circumstances of the building in question and who is potentially the quote unquote owner of the pollution. But I would definitely suggest looking into the Brownfields program. And even if you are a smaller nonprofit or community organization, be aware that EPA has several technical assistance programs that could actually help you basically do free consulting to understand the eligibilities around a certain program and how that could fit within a potential future grant application. So I would be happy to put you in touch with the technical assistance for Brownfields programs or provide any additional information if you'd like to reach out separately. I think Cyrus did also have another program he wanted to share.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest as I talk to folks around the region in low-income residential services is what we're calling, because it goes beyond weatherization or energy efficiency. It's recognizing that the Southeast has some of the poorest building stock in the country. And there are many, many homes that cannot even begin to be weatherized because they have structural health and safety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, issues with them. And so we're increasingly looking at integrating the various funding streams, and housing and urban development, U.S. housing and urban development has healthy homes funding of a variety of flavors, I think, that can be used for lead abatement, asbestos removal, and other things that can get a home in shape for weatherization and energy efficiency. So we're hoping to learn a lot more about that. It's not something SIA has a lot of expertise in, but yeah, great question.
All right, and Chuck's information is there in the chat if y'all want to share more information about that. Katie, do you want to introduce your connection, and maybe are they going to tackle this electric vehicle question? Or
yeah, I'm going to put Sumner on the spot here. Sumner Pomeroy with Clean Cities Georgia. As was mentioned earlier, there's a significant amount of funding for electric vehicles, and there was mentioned that there are a number of groups that have resources to help as folks are developing projects. I'd like to invite Sumner to take a minute to introduce herself and talk a little bit of the work and the resources that they're putting together. And I need to unmute her. Okay, there we go. Thanks, Sumner.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Katie. Let me put a plug in here for Clean Cities Georgia. I will do my best to answer the electric vehicle question. I gotta find it in the chat here. So just a bit about Clean Cities Georgia. We're a nonprofit that is almost 30 years old now, and it's funded through the Department of Energy and a network of Clean Cities coalitions that is nationwide. There's about 80 different ones across the US, and we're all kind of doing the same sort of work, trying to address reducing petroleum use and making sure that we are doing that through a lot of different alternative fuel vehicles and technologies. So the organization is hosted out of South-Based Energy Institute, but it's run by Frank Morris as the executive director, myself as the coordinator, as well as our board. And so we are working with all fuel types to reduce petroleum use in general. So that includes electric, natural gas, propane, biodiesel, and others. And we really serve as a collaborative partner for stakeholders who are interested in doing these types of alternative fuel vehicle projects, working with alternative fuels. And primarily, we work as a grant manager, administering some of these grants, assisting others in receiving fundings for alternative fuel vehicle projects. One example that I can give you guys is a grant that we manage called Drive EVs USA. And they do work with multiple states, mostly in the Southeast right now, but it's spreading. And it's an effort to advance electric vehicles and technologies nationwide. So ours is called Drive Electric Georgia. I'll put that in the chat for you soon. But it's really to address a lot of different concerns statewide, getting stakeholders engaged so that we are addressing policies and incentives, as a lot of folks have talked about. Also trying to get utilities on board for some of these projects, and getting dealerships, having their sales folks engaged and educated so they can actually answer questions regarding EVs. So that's just one example of one of the grants that we manage. But with our connections with the Department of Energy, we do receive some additional information down the pipeline a little bit more in advance than others. So the only thing we've been told so far is that, we don't have a lot of answers, but the DOT is supposed to be publishing guidance for the IJA specifically, and how the states and cities should work with that no later than February 11th. So it kind of gives you any idea of timeline, some time to prep and do some of these things that have been discussed. But as you're sort of prepping and getting some of your ideas into shape and needing any data, we can be a resource for you. So just getting some of the ideas figured out, collaboration opportunities, those sorts of things. So I'll put my email in the chat, as well as our 2 links to our 2 website addresses. And I have to try and find the question again for the electric vehicles. I know there's a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline. We just don't know what exactly it's going to look like yet.
So Kwame's question was specifically talking about SIA grants, but I don't think it was, maybe it was grants that Cyrus mentioned. Maybe we should just, can we unmute? Kwame, do you want to ask your question? Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hey, thanks for the great presentation, the informational opportunity here. Yeah, so I noticed like Justice 40 said something about like EVs grants, but also I guess the SEIA grants also had like a slide on that, the energy efficient transportation, but a lot of the SEIA grants seem to be, information seemed to be more towards, I guess, building efficiency, energy, that type of efficiency. So I was wondering if there is still some SEIA money available for clean transportation, environment that would be reduce pollution and electric vehicle infrastructure that would help with that. Is that like a way that can be, can you use those grants for that? That's what I'm asking.
Got it. So just to clarify, the grants I shared are not our grants. They're just grants that are kind of related to the work that we do. So that's why they were listed in my deck. And absolutely, I think Michael did a great job in listing a lot of the EV infrastructure grants. We're going to be updating our presentation. My colleague is actively working on that. So at a future point, I'll share it with Katie and she can send it out to the group once we've got a little bit more information about those. But absolutely, to your point, the answer is undoubtedly yes. EV's got a big bump in infrastructure, though, as Ali mentioned at the beginning, not nearly as much as we'd like to see. But it's a good start, and I'll honestly say, based on my experience, I think, of course we want to see Build Back Better passed and funded at the levels that people have advocated for. But in the Southeast, we've got a serious concern about capacity. And there's a lot in the infrastructure bill that we need to start focusing on now. There's still leftover American Rescue Plan money. Most Southeastern states are going to get a second shot of that in summer of 2022. And there are very few communities I've talked to that were able to get climate-related priorities funded through the first round. So long and short of it is, there's a lot of existing and expected money out there that we need to be planning for.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwame. Question from Lynn Young. Michael talked about FEMA's attempts to identify what is an underserved vulnerable community under the Justice 40 program. Is there a clear, consistent definition of the communities or types of households who the Justice 40 program is targeted to serve that will be used by all of the agencies?
So I'd be happy to take that unless, Alicia, you'd like to. Basically, the interim implementation guidance identifies 12 different categories. Among those are energy, water cost burden, transportation, disproportionate climate risk, tribal communities. And so it's hard to say that there's a clear definition of how they will actually assess these, because we generally only have the interim guidance. It's not until we actually get the final guidance that we'll have a little bit more information. And actually, I'll tie this in with another question as well. But generally right now, the federal government is behind on getting us the final guidance, or getting agencies the final guidance. So we were supposed to receive something earlier this year, generally late September, October timeframe, after agencies submitted their information, but we have not seen that yet. So we're really waiting for that final guidance to come out to understand exactly those definitions and who would necessarily qualify. But that being said, for the 21 pilot programs, they're already working with those definitions as they were in the interim guidance. So that's where I would point to relevant data sets such as the EJ screen. In addition, I know one of the other questions had about how this is going to percolate through state governments and how states will actually implement or potentially understand what the federal government's priorities are. And this is one question I really have about J40, is that, as we know, a lot of this funding will go through state entities. And while it's a lot more clear for federal agencies in implementing J40, there's a lot of this questions, particularly around everything from the state revolving funds to a lot of these other huge opportunities at the state level that I'm just not sure yet how they will implement the guidance or goals of J40. So there's a lot of unfortunate uncertainty right now about that.
All right, this is a good, maybe quick round, rapid fire round for all of our panelists. Bailey asks, are there, so Michael already actually went, but are there other examples beyond Michael's example of places where you do feel like there's a little bit of a need to watchdog the process and make sure that things are moving smoothly to really accomplish kind of the big vision of this infrastructure bill? So why don't we start with Katie? Just real quick.
Yeah, I think if the question is there a need to bird dog and watch it, I'd say absolutely. Of course, with the newer programs that we're seeing from DOE and other agencies, they'll go through a agency rulemaking process that will allow for notice and comment. So there's a process there to provide input. But for some of the existing programs that are just getting a boost in funding, without engagement from the nonprofit and communities that are affected and customers of the programs, it's potentially, there's a high potential that the funding will just go through the normal pathways, which in some cases is good, but in other cases we may want them to sort of switch approach, especially for things like the state energy program, which I used to manage at the state of Tennessee, so I'm kind of partial. I keep mentioning that one, but as we're bumping up funding through existing programs, states and local governments ought to reconsider how they've been delivering those programs, and we can play a role as advocates to help shape it. We're, as Cyrus mentioned, reporting requirements, especially with Department of Energy, Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office grants, a lot of acronyms, EERE, they have built-in reporting requirements and tools for grantees to use. That is something to know in advance when you apply for a grant, because there is a requirement quarterly, sometimes monthly, you have to report on what you've done, not just financial, but energy saved, various metrics. It's important to know that that's there. I expect they'll continue to use those tools, but for the newer programs, need to make sure that they're built in, that accountability is there too.
Great. Cyrus, anything to add?
I'll just clarify, as based on the information I have, the energy codes money is actually going to go through the state energy offices. They're going to be the eligible applicants. And my understanding is that organizations will be able to partner with them to access those competitive funds. Still getting information on that, but that's my current understanding. So it would not run through DCA in that particular case.
Alicia?
I am always going to say, yes, you want to bird dog your local governments, because while the funds will come down through states, likely in the form of CDBG block grants, a lot of the money will come down in that form. You want to stay connected to your local elected city councils, county commissions, economic development authorities. Those are the spaces that we really want to look at, because the federal government still believes that cities are going to do right by the people who elected them, and we all know that that's not true. So all politics is local, and this is your money. This is your taxpayer money. This is the money that your great grandkids are going to be paying back for many, many years after you're long and gone. So pay close attention to local government, the projects in local government, and we're going to have community coalitions and watchdog agencies to make sure that that money doesn't go to give the fancy side of town another set of green spaces and sidewalks, and that it does go to the side of town that should have had sidewalks and green spaces 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Allie, do you have anything to add to the watchdog component?
I mean, I agree on just needing to be, engaged at the local level. I think if you want to see areas for concern, I just look at how the American Rescue Plan funds have been distributed, right? It's been often disorganized. I mean, we looked at who actually applied and received some of those funds for some of the more environmental type work, and it's sort of your traditional organizations. And so that's why we want to be as keyed in as we are right here. So that, I think my main concern is that communities that need this the most either don't know about the opportunities, right? Or maybe don't have the resources and support to apply. So that's where we want to be really keyed in.
May I add one more thing? We sit on a couple of working groups for the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, as well as National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And there has been interim talk about direct payments, because we know that everything gets political when it comes out of Washington and it hits a state. Whatever state has the majority party in office, that money tends to flow in their direction. So there is talk of direct payments. We haven't heard the final on that. Some of the recommendations PSC made to FERC was to create local watchdogs with some of the NGOs, but there is talk of direct payments. We don't know what that's going to look like. And then there was a question in the chat. Some of the money, it depends on the type of projects, whether or not a for-profit will get some of the money. So yes, we can expect the for-profit companies like construction workers, people who build bridges, site design firms, they will benefit from some of the infrastructure investment and repair. So you're going to want to look at your procurement, the city's purchasing and procurement departments for those types of projects. If you are a for-profit, there'll be everything from environmental consultants who will be parts of some of these infrastructure repair projects, to general contractors, to pipe fitters, et cetera, et cetera.
Ooh, Alicia, thank you for doing my job. I think the last question I've seen that we haven't then touched on is this apprenticeship question. So could we put some of these funds towards apprenticeship programs?
I'll take a stab at that. Go ahead, if somebody knows better.
I'm going to say yes. And a lot of everyone on this call, everyone on the panel, we are in the talks for developing a workforce development program, which will spur an apprenticeship program. And then I'll step back now and let other panelists answer.
I think the problem with me answering is I don't know enough about what it means, what you mean by an apprenticeship program, but there is, for example, the career skills pot of funding, which I think is 2022 only pot of money, is designed to give 50% scholarships for those going through a program that ends in a certificate for installing these advanced building technologies. So if that's the sort of thing you're looking at, then absolutely yes.
Great. All right. I want to lift up the survey that Katie, I think, posted in the chat. Everybody take a minute to go to the chat, click on the Google Doc that's posted there, give us some feedback. We'd love it. Feel free also to reach out to folks on this call. I think, speakers, if you want to, you can share your contact information in the chat. Feel free to reach out to us. And then, as I said, I think we acknowledge that this is an ongoing conversation and look forward to that conversation as it moves forward, and hope folks on this will be a partner with us. So thank you all for joining. Southface, thank you for herding cats, and hope everyone has a great Tuesday.
Thanks, everyone. And Jeanette, remind folks we'll have this video posted on YouTube if you want to share with your colleagues or know someone that may be interested but couldn't attend. Thanks again.